Thank you for joining us. We're very excited to bring you episode 3 of the Building with Humanity program, developed by the Schulich Real Property Association and the Brookfield Center in Real Estate and Infrastructure at the Schulich School of Business. We put this program together as a platform to engage more of our alumni and professionals in the real estate and infrastructure industry to explore the feelings, aspirations, and ideas for reimagining how we do business to create a healthier, happier, more peaceful, and more equitable planet. So episode 3 we're very excited about. It's called Embracing the Power of People, an honest conversation amongst leaders. So first I'm going to start by introducing the 4 panelists that we have joining us today, and then I'm going to pass it on to Ryan to get the discussion going. So first of all, we have Habon Ali. Habon is the Associate Director of Planning and Delivery at Sidewalk Labs. Her professional background has encompassed multiple disciplines, including real estate and community development, waterfront planning, and transportation planning and policy. Thank you for joining us. Next up, we have Alex. Alex is responsible for the management of Greywood's private equity fundraising program, as well as the analysis and underwriting of new real estate development opportunities. During his 9 years at Greywood, Alex has been involved in over $270 million in equity fundraising. Next up, we've got Ryan. Ryan Ram is Principal, Strategy and Engagement at Matrix 360, a native of Montreal with an MBA and over 8 years of experience in the business world. Ryan is focused on connecting talent with the commercial real estate and development industry. Ryan is a champion and partner for diversity, equity, and inclusion. His passion to provide a platform for people to share their stories and connect their journey fosters his ability to further build trust as a business leader with Matrix 360. And next up, we've got Chandran Fernando. And for Chandran, the human connection is integral and matters greatly. As the founder and managing partner for Matrix 360, Chandran has built an advisory platform for talent and workplace strategy in the Canadian real estate and development industry over the last 2 decades. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Ryan to take over, and hope you all enjoy.
Thanks so much, Leerad. So hi everyone, welcome to our talk today. 2020 has really been an eye-opener for us all. We've witnessed the world change in how we socialize with each other, how we educate our minds, and how we conduct business with each other. There seems to be an uproot in our social, educational, and economical systems. In North America, we are undergoing a wave of change due to COVID-19 and a topic that has been hidden from our main stage of society, racism. The formal definition of racism is ideas or practices that establish, maintain, or perpetuate the racial superiority or dominance of one group over another. So part of that is today we are giving our proceeds from our sponsor to a group called a foundation, the Thompson Egbo Arts Foundation. And we're donating our proceeds as they're an organization focused on providing opportunities to youth in underserved communities with the goal to help young people build positive change and a sense of self-worth through art-focused educational programming. For many parents in the GTA who are working and who don't have the means to pay for additional childcare, they normally enroll their kids in summer camp. And due to COVID-19, the Thompson Egbo Arts Foundation is looking to raise money to distribute. Their first goal was 1,000 boxes to kids across the city with art supplies and other resources. And now they're working on fundraising for their second 1,000 boxes. So we're happy to be funding them in order to help youth in order to have the resources to be able to play this summer. So going back to my previous point, I want to stress that racism, along with many of the isms, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, in addition to homophobia and transphobia, are systems that are based on ignorance, prejudice, bigotry, assumptions, and biases that continue to negatively impact how we live, work, learn, play, and chill. I know that hearing some of these words might feel uncomfortable to you, but we really need to embrace the discomfort in order to move through it. These systems do exist in our Canadian society, and they are connected to our behaviors, habits, and perspective, whether consciously or unconsciously. The impact of these systems benefit few and deny many. They are the key ingredients is ignorance, though, where we consciously or unconsciously choose to remain in the dark, uneducated, with assumptions that create biases about people. For example, most white people, myself included, growing up didn't learn how to talk about race or how we perpetuate racist ideology, even if unknowingly. I know that this is uncomfortable to admit as a white person. It feels easier to remain ignorant on the topic, and as such, most of my life was blind to these issues as well. However, several years back, I decided to break out of this once I realized the impact my silence was having on others. And I chose to do the work to open my mind and listen and learn on how others experience the world differently than I do. So this is one of the many reasons I'm proud to be a part of Matrix 360. For over the last 2 decades, we have consciously addressed the power of intersectionality of people through talent management and workplace strategies. We recognize that the plethora of isms continue to marginalize and underserve many. We consistently address this and strongly believe that they are the key thread to divisiveness in our society and industry. To learn more, you can check out our website and download our anti-racism strategy roadmap. So why am I here discussing this with you today? We know that the conversation around diversity and equity has been fatiguing. The same old circular conversation has been going on for years with relatively little or no impact. It has caused feelings of fear, blame, shame, and guilt, but little action. So thinking and conversing in these binary terms seems to have been ineffective and divisive. But we do believe that conversations can be powerful given its context and purpose. We have utilized the vehicle of conversations and sharing stories of people to help push the boundaries of workplaces. We believe that people have the power to shift narratives and build better workplaces and societies through business. This happens only when we have open dialogue with each other and share perspectives with one another about our differences, but even more importantly, about our commonalities, so that we can build stronger foundations in how we interact and thrive and not just survive. So through our relationship with the Brookfield Center and the SRPAA, we are continuing our Matrix mission to amplify the importance of the dialogue that will hopefully trigger you today to pause, reflect, unlearn, relearn, and action up to build better workplaces. After all, we are real estate professionals focused on building communities. Now, let's get into this. I believe that I'm a curious person and I like to explore, learn, and speak with people. This is how I expand my own boundaries. A few years ago, I was fortunate to hear our first guest speaking at a conference. She was sharing her perspective on city building and its impact, and I wanted to learn more. So I approached Tabana to kickstart a conversation. A few years later, and many conversations later, here we are. I asked Taban to join us today to share her journey and perspectives on working in our industry. Haban is the Associate Director of Planning and Delivery at Sidewalk Labs. Welcome, Haban. Thanks for being here. So to jump into this, could you please share with us an overview of your personal career journey?
Sure, absolutely. Just to start off, I just want to say thank you to Ryan and obviously to the broader kind of organizing committee for really just creating the space to have this conversation today, and certainly for the invitation for myself to be a part of that. I wanted to start sort of just, mentioning that I am, of course, a born and bred Torontonian. I grew up in the northwest end of the city, a place that I'm quite proud of, in a small social housing community in and around the area of kind of Islington and Finch. I did go to York, so certainly have a connection for maybe some of the folks that are joining the call today. And so really my connection with the city really kind of was limited to this area in the northwest end of the city that was sort of between Islington and Finch area and the York University community, which around that Finch and Keele area. And so much of what I understood about urbanism and place really came from living in that sort of community. What's interesting, it is a largely majority minority community, and really includes a bit of a stretch of land that has actually been called one of the ugliest places in Toronto. Yeah, it's the kind of place that urbanists really hate. A place that surrenders to cars, it has a ton of strip malls, random signage all over the place, limited street trees in certain areas. But for me, it really had this incredible richness to it, a sense of vibrancy and sort of culture that was in the place, and perhaps not, you know, traditionally what urban planners would think of vibrant communities in those kind of places. But for me, I didn't really understand what all of that meant until much later on, until I had sort of graduated from York University, until I started working for the City of Toronto. And I had the opportunity to work on a project called Doors Open Toronto, sort of a yearly event that encourages people to explore the places and spaces that make up the City of Toronto. And at the same time, I was meeting a bunch of urbanists, you know, folks that were planning students, that were practicing planners, and were really encouraging me to, you know, really have a bigger deep dive into what it meant to sort of understand communities and understand neighborhoods. And I started kind of falling in love with this idea of, you know, becoming a city builder, becoming an urbanist, kind of falling in love with this idea of, you know, changing the way that people thought about sort of traditional ugly places in the city, and sort of changing the narrative of what that actually meant, and finding ways to actually take communities like the one that I grew up in, and making them more functional while also kind of maintaining that sense of vibrancy in life that already existed in those places. So I've had the opportunity to work for the last sort of 8 years or so in private planning practice at a firm called Urban Strategies, and now at the firm Sidewalk Labs. I'm excited to kind of continue that trend of thinking about how we think about place and how we improve urban life in many different ways. So.
Awesome, thanks for sharing that. So to kind of get into our conversation for today, when I called you to be part of this discussion, can you tell me a bit about some of your first concerns and thoughts with being a part of this?
Yeah. So honestly, my honest reaction, Ryan, was to figure out a way that I could politely decline your invitation. And that was sort of the first reaction that I had to your invitation to be part of that. And to be honest, that was for a couple of different reasons. You know, I think that we're certainly in this moment where, you know, many folks are thinking about anti-Black racism, they're thinking about white privilege, they're thinking about having conversations about implicit bias. But, you know, personally, I think that learning really must come from folks really being ready to sort of do the homework on their own, or sort of do their homework in advance. You know, there's so much literature and materials that are available online today, and part of what I was thinking about initially was that, you know, it should be on the onus of Black folks, of people of color, to sort of provide the teaching, to consistently be able to sort of share their experiences. That folks really have to come to these conversations having done that homework in advance. And what I was worried about is that, you know, perhaps one conversation with one Black in a particular circumstance wouldn't push the needle on some very heavy conversations that need to happen, that this is a much broader dialogue and requires much more deep thinking in many different contexts. You know, you mentioned as a part of your introduction that these can be somewhat uncomfortable conversations, conversations for yourself, for the listeners. Also comes, particularly for me, with some significant risks as a part of sort of speaking on these topic areas. You know, there are many challenges already that I've faced in entering this industry that I'm in, sort of planning and development, and broadly that many sort of people of color face in trying to enter this industry more broadly. And when you do find success in these areas, you've got to be very careful about how you use your voice and what kind of context you're able to use your voice, because that comes with some risks and associated challenges as a part of that. You know, I've certainly found that there have been many instances where, you know, people of color and sort of Black planners have had the kind of conversations that we need to have today, but are, you know, consistently labeled as perhaps a little bit too controversial, you know, as folks that are too loud, that are folks that are too disruptive. And that has many implications for kind of long-term career trajectories. You know, in some instances, it leads to, you know, bad performance reviews. It can lead to delayed promotions. It can lead to lower wages. And so as much as these are incredibly important conversations, for the folks that you're asking to be a part of that, it certainly comes with some associated risks involved with that. And so that was certainly part of the considerations that I had in accepting the invitation. I will say, though, that, you know, the conversation that we did have led to a 2-hour-long discussion on many of these different topic areas. I think what I'm so excited about was learning more about, you know, the work that you're doing, the kind of conversation that you're hoping to have as a part of that, and really understanding that this is part of a much broader and deeper dialogue that you've started, and then the folks in the organized committee have started. And so, you know, I was then excited to sort of lend my voice to be a part of this conversation today.
Thanks, Bon. I appreciate, you know, your willingness within that framework to kind of put yourself out there I know for you, we've had a lot of conversations around kind of your own experiences in the industry that, you know, maybe you haven't kind of talked to the broader social groups about, or everyone that you've worked with. And I understand that, you know, for you, you have to think about, you know, is speaking your mind or kind of bringing issues to light going to impact you in a certain way? Is that going to, you know, someone listening to say, I don't know, you know, if she's going to like rock the boat in our company or in our team, you know, maybe she's not the right fit. And I know that's something that, you know, unfortunately, you and many others need to deal with. So I appreciate you being part of this. And so I guess on that note, you know, being a young Black, visibly Muslim woman in the real estate development industry, you know, have you experienced any subtle or direct behaviors in a professional context that have impacted you personally or your professional growth?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a couple of different sort of layers, I guess, to this question. You know, certainly what I've seen is, in some instances, folks wanting to have these kinds of conversations. So with respect to talking about, you know, diversity in cities, designing for diversity, designing for inclusion, and what that means from a development sort of planning perspective, and sort of seeking me out to sort of participate in those kind of conversations. I think, you know, so far what I've found a little bit frustrating about that process is that, you know, despite the understanding and the need for, you know, representation on these types of subject matters, what we're often seeing is that that's often still lacking in some type of circumstances. And, you know, we're not seeing the kind of representation that's really needed in these conversations around, you know, multicultural cities and designing for diversity in many different respects. And what has been kind of frustrating for me going through some of those experiences is that I'm often asked to participate in those conversations in the 11th hour, for instance, or in circumstances where an organization has been, you know, publicly shamed online for the lack of representation in a conference or an event that they're hosting. And it's still sort of a very much an after the fact consideration in most scenarios. And I think that in other circumstances, even if you are invited to participate, my own personal experiences in some cases have been where I've been invited to participate as a moderator for a discussion and not necessarily as one of the actual active participants in the conversation. So it's certainly much more about improving the optics of what that actually means to sort of do that versus having a diversity of voices in the actual conversation there. And that's really to kind of the point that you mentioned earlier, you know, not wanting to rock the boat, being a little bit too disruptive, and being able to censor the kind of conversations that are happening. And I think, you know, for me personally, I'm not interested in being an afterthought, being consulted at sort of the 11th hour as part of these conversations. I'm certainly not interested in, you know, being the face of promotional materials, for instance. And I'm also not interested in being invited because I'm perhaps a little less controversial than some of the more outspoken Black planners and Black developers that are, you know, having uncomfortable conversations and making people feel uncomfortable in those settings. You know, I'm interested in people who are really interested in doing this work and having these deep and meaningful conversations those ways, and making it the front and center aspect of the work that we're trying to do, not certainly the after fact as it's been. When I think about, you know, my entry into this world of development and planning, there have certainly been many different circumstances where it's been challenging for me to navigate what this looks like. You know, I've certainly loved being a planner for the many years that I've been able to do that, but I've been really excited about entering more of a, you know, more traditional development role. And when I wanted to sort of think about what a career trajectory might look like and shifting over and doing more development work, you know, I did what many people do. You start reaching out to your networks. You try to find people that will have conversations with you about how to enter that, you know, enter a little bit of a different position. And in having those discussions, I was immediately confronted with a lot of the same messaging that I wouldn't fit in that scenario, that, you know, I would be uncomfortable working alongside some of the, you know, the developers and the industry sort of folks that were there. And that in fact that I would have more success working for a municipality like in Mississauga or in Brampton, for instance. You know, this was the actual feedback that I was getting from folks that I was talking to. And to your point, Ryan, you know, what I was thinking about is what part of me doesn't fit. You know, is it the fact that I'm a woman and there's traditionally a lot less women in these roles? Is it the fact that I'm Black? And again, there's a lot less less Black people in these roles? Is it the fact that I'm a visible Muslim, again, because you can't find that in these roles? And so for me, it's frustrating to have these conversations, but also confusing, because you're trying to figure out what part of it doesn't fit. And what was also frustrating is that these are folks that I really trusted in the industry. They're folks that I admire, that I would love to have the opportunity to work for. And we weren't having a conversation about what a pathway might look like for me to enter that particular position, or perhaps what they could do to make sure that I had an opportunity to find those kind of roles that might be coming forward. It was just an immediate, this is not going to work scenario. And so, you know, I think that's commonplace for a lot of the folks that, you know, I'm around, a lot of the folks that I sort of consult with in the work that I'm doing. And is just an added layer to the many other challenges that you face. You know, to the point about, you know, the subtleties and conversations that folks have. I'm often in meetings where, you know, I'm the lead person making the presentation, and folks don't realize that I'm the person here to deliver the entire presentation. And after the fact, I always get comments like, you know, I really wasn't expecting that. I didn't think that perhaps you would have been the person that we're leading, or I didn't think that you would be so articulate as part of this process. And so, you know, it takes away from the work that I've done. It takes away from, you know, the many, many hours and commitment that I have to doing city building, and makes this work even more exhausting than it can already be in some cases. So.
Yeah, you know, I've heard that sentiment from many other people, and I appreciate you sharing that so publicly. You know, and a lot of people, not that they're doing it on purpose, but I think that's part of what this dialogue is to be mindful that, you know, what does it mean for someone to fit in or to be a fit for a team or a company? We use that word very loosely, and then when we do say, okay, we need, you know, more diversity on our team, feels more of a checkbox or a tokenism approach, as you shared a little bit before, and that can really be felt by people, to be that kind of other that's brought into a team, into a presentation, into a meeting, just for the optics of it. So, I mean, in terms of, you know, in terms of diversity, if we're going to talk about it a little bit bigger picture, like, how has the word or term diversity, or the mindset that we have of like corporate diversity, do you feel impacted your experience moving through the industry?
So I think that, you know, what we were seeing today and have a lot of evidence of today is that, you know, we're trying to increase the number of underrepresented groups that are in the industry. And certainly that's sort of the focus of at least the work that I've seen done so far. So increasing the number of women, increasing the number of people of color, that type of thing. But I think the challenge there is the belief that, you know, if you can see or identify one or two people of color, sort of these others in those categories, then the work is being done. And I think that, you know, as a part of why real change has really been slow to come by is because of that notion that as long as you can identify one or two folks within the meeting room, then you've all of a sudden hit your diversity quotas, or you've understood what, you know, corporate diversity should look like. I think, you know, for me, doing the work doesn't mean that you now have a headshot of Haban in your project proposal, which means you'll increase the number of business that you can do in a certain community. That's not what it's all about. And I think the focus has too much been on that, and trying to be able to improve the optics of those certain circumstances that you're in. And I think, you know, it's to the intro that you provided, and as a part of this broader conversation, I think we're all really trying to understand that the work is really about historically recognizing the groups that have been made invisible in this process, and understanding what you're losing out on by not investing in the strategies and the practices that truly bring about new perspectives, new schools of thoughts, new experiences at the table, and what that can mean for your organization. I think, you know, the research and the research that Matrix has done and other organizations have done, really the business case around diversity is at this point overwhelming. Like, the evidence is absolutely there today. And the evidence really demonstrates that when you think about bringing in new talent from a variety of different pools, what you're doing is you're increasing performance, you're increasing creativity, problem-solving skills, and ultimately profitability, which is, you know, a key factor of what people are thinking about. I think it was probably the Boston Consulting Group that released a study that said that, you know, diverse management teams are 19% able to increase their revenues as a result of innovation that's brought to their organizations because of that. And those are key statistics that are demonstrating why it's important to do that work. So, you know, it's been helpful for me to be included in different conversations, and helpful for me to be recognized as, you know, somebody who's bringing about innovation because of a diversity of thought and experiences. But certainly there's a lot more work to do, I think, when we think about what it means to actually diversify our workplaces.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that that term or meaning of diversity is really what we need to kind of shift our mindsets on. That it's not, diversity isn't just about other people. Like, diversity is all of us. We are all part of diversity, including the white guys. And we all need to be at the table together in order to really foster change. It's not about having, you know, the white people and then the other, or the white men and then the other. Like, it's really about everyone coming together. And so to wrap up our conversation, you know, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and insights, Yvonne. My last question to you: for people working in the commercial real estate and development industry right now, to understand the importance of diversity and the impact on equity and belonging, what can people do personally and professionally to learn more? One point on that. And for the people listening who can relate to your experience in the industry, what would you say to them for them to do more or get involved?
Right. So I think, you know, as a bit of sort of two parts to that, there's a ton of kind of individual learning that I think needs to happen. And this is a fantastic start, this conversation, you know, having those uncomfortable conversations and acknowledging that you're going to have some missteps on the way. I think folks these days have talked a lot about, you know, not wanting to say the wrong thing if you're having this conversation. Know that that's going to happen, and that's okay. It's sort of part of the learning and part of the journey that we're all going through as a part of this. But also, you know, build yourself a curriculum. You know, you have to recognize that you've got your own blind spots, that there's a lot of sort of gaps to fill into that. And right now there's just an incredible amount of resources are becoming more and more available to help you sort of do that. So find that material and make sure that that's part of your ongoing journey of learning. But also, I think, you know, as a part of that individual experience, I think, you know, folks have to really ask themselves some serious questions. And part of that is asking yourself, what are you willing to give up to create space for other people? And really, how are you going to use your power and your privilege to help affect change in some of these areas, and to bring about, you know, to allow for those experiences to happen for those who have traditionally been left out as a part of that. From an organization perspective, I think, you know, we're seeing that there are many, many obvious things that HR teams are starting to do with respect to hiring practices, retention practices, you know, how we are procuring the individual DEI training that can happen within organizations. Certainly, again, the work that Matrix is doing, the CREED playbook that folks will hopefully soon hear a little bit more about, which I'm excited to sort of talk about with folks as well. But I think specifically for developers, you know, understanding the work that you might be doing in racialized and diverse communities, you know, spending more time in those communities, doing things like creating partnerships, going beyond the statutory planning requirements to consult, which is essentially just one meeting in a particular community. A lot more needs to happen for you to really understand the roots of what communities are going through, and looking to real estate to help build wealth in communities. That's a key part of sort of making sure that we are supporting each other in the ways that we need to be doing over time. And again, you know, to your last point, just around, you know, to folks that are listening that may have some similar experiences around this, you know, I was listening to a talk yesterday that talked about whether or not we are, you know, in a moment of time, or is this a movement that we're going through? And while I'd like to, you know, I'd like to really think that we are in a movement, that this isn't a moment in time, that folks are just going to have these conversations for the next couple of weeks. They're going to, you know, do one DEI training and sort of move on from there. What I'm seeing, and what I'm certainly encouraged by, is the willingness to really roll up your sleeves right now. The willingness to really demonstrate a commitment to doing this for the longer term. And, you know, a recognition that a lot needs to change, and sort of transformative change needs to happen in order to do that. And what I'm hopeful for is that, you know, this movement will carry on a lot longer than I think most people think it will be. This might be the thing that changes the tide in terms of how we think about diversity training and diversity within the industry overall. And so that's the part that I'm excited about. That's the part that I'm hoping that we can have more conversations about. And that's what I hope to see over the next many months and years as we continue to do this work together.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Yvonne. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And now let's kind of take this conversation on its next journey. And I'm going to introduce our two next professionals who will highlight the importance of curiosity to learn about boundaries of doing better. And that's Chandran Fernando, Managing Partner at Matrix 360, and Alex Karamarkovic, VP of Corporate Development at Greywoods. You can take it away. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Ryan and Haban, for sharing that information and that your journey. Very powerful. I wish that we had actually another hour to just to understand a little bit more based on your experiences. And secondly, I want to really, truly thank the Schulich student alumni group for putting this series on. I was fortunate enough to have access to the first series, and I'll talk to you about that later. But what I'm really focused on here and why we're having this conversation is one of the reasons that frustrates myself over the last 20 years is having these constant circular conversations around diversity and equity that lead to checkbox approaches and answers and pledges that don't have any meaningful impact. What I know is two things. Well, I kind of know more things, but two main things that I want to share with you is our industry is truly lagging with any progressive action when it comes to equity and diversity for our industry. I also know that there is actually a silver box answer to this. And what it is, it's all about accountability. And the accountability to approach everything that you do with care, commitment, and curiosity to learn how to do better. And this goes back to the first series that the Student Association has created. I really want to sincerely thank Michael Krazik and Anthony DeSano. Do pardon me if I mispronounced your name, for actually leading the webinar series and showcasing what leaders actually need to do more of. So thank you from my heart to your heart and from my brain to your brain. Thanks for that. And if you haven't watched it, I truly recommend that you ask the school to have access to that because it was a very powerful conversation. So a few years ago, we decided, Matrix, we decided to gather a few of the real estate professionals from our industry to form a group. Now it's an association to truly address what equity and diversity is for our industry. And this new organization that we formed collectively together is called Creed Council. And this particular council was really to create a hub where we could create tools, educational portal for leaders and non-leaders to access when it comes to this conversation and moving it towards action. So, and one of the main reasons we committed and are establishing this platform is summarized so well by a person who I really think is a great leader, Andre. But hopefully he's not listening right now. And if he is, let's maybe not tell him right now about this. But recently he stated something on LinkedIn what really captured the true essence of what Creed Council is. So I'd like to borrow some of his words right now. And he said this: when you take a look around the room at any meeting of commercial real estate movers and shakers, and you know that there must be some kind of system at work. Only problem is this system was built in the 19th century and we're in the 21st century. We need to start talking for real. And I want to add something to that and we also want to learn how to expand our mindsets and workplaces. And one leader who is a founding participant of the Creed Council is Alex Karamarkovic. I do apologize for mispronouncing that. Perfect. Okay, close. Okay. And he's the Vice President of Corporate Development from Greywood Developments. So Alex, welcome. Thank you for taking this opportunity to share with us. I truly appreciate that. So to begin, Alex, could you please share with us a high-level background of your professional story with us?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to, again, thank the SRPAA and Matrix for having me here. Feel really privileged to be on here today and part of this conversation. I'm a proud graduate of the undergraduate program at Schulich with a focus on finance and accounting. I spent the first 4 years of my career in a public accounting role focused on audit and tax engagements, primarily in the real estate industry, which really kind of piqued my interest and made me realize that that was an industry I wanted to be a part of and learn more about. And that led me to Greywood Developments, which is a Toronto-based mid-sized residential development firm. And I originally joined Greywood in a financial reporting role, and I spent about 2 years doing that. Eventually transitioned into an acquisition role, underwriting new developments in the Greater Toronto Area and in the US. And eventually I've transitioned into my current role, which is in fundraising and corporate development. So I'm primarily responsible for leading Greywood's fundraising efforts for private real estate funds, so engaging with our existing and prospective high net worth and institutional investors and maintaining those relationships.
Perfect. Thanks for that. So I really want to focus on the Creed Council experience because we only have like 15 minutes or 20 minutes to kind of chat. So we're going to try to speed this up. And obviously, you're a white man. I'm a brown man. I'm roughly just around the 30 plus mark, right? You're about the same, right? So, so we're sort of in that young leaders, I think so, right? Category.
Developing leaders, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I want to just take it a little deep here right now. I want to understand why you said yes when we approached you to be part of this dialogue called Creed around diversity and equity for our industry. What were those triggers for you at that time for you to say, I'm curious, I'm saying yes, I'll join?
Absolutely. So I guess first I have to give credit to Ryan for being very persistent in his pursuit and telling me more about this great initiative. So I have to give credit to him. But apart from his persistence, I think generally I felt very fortunate, for the personal circumstances I find myself in, and I'm always kind of looking for ways to give back. And I think this sense of gratitude comes in part from being able to relate to having difficulty not fitting in, and that goes back to when I first immigrated here from Serbia when I was 8 years old, and as any other immigrant has faced just the difficulties of assimilating and fitting in a different culture. But not to disclose my age, but that was kind of well over 25 years ago. And since then, and after kind of figuring out my way, I have to say, and looking back in my experience, it's been a relatively smooth progression, both in my education and career, and has really, again, made me feel very fortunate for having that path. And after, even with the very first session in the Creed Council, it was very obvious that, my experience isn't shared by others. I probably knew that, but didn't, you don't recognize it as much until you're sitting across for the table from someone who's, has a very powerful story. And that really, hooked me and made me want to continue to do more, and, made me come back month after month to the sessions.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that a little bit more. What was that hook for you that, triggered you to continue the conversation, helping us collectively build this playbook?
I mean, again, I have to give some credit to you and Ryan and the rest of the team for just the way that the Creed Council was structured. And it was done in a very professional way. The sessions were facilitated. There's different topics each month, different group exercises. And it was a real process of learning. And I think, like many other people, I'm focused on growth and learning. And this is an area where, you don't traditionally get exposure to in your day-to-day career and in a typical finance or, or real estate environment. So this was an area that I saw myself growing in. And one of the first exercises, I remember one of the early sessions where we had to, you read out bios of various professionals, and you asked us to match up that bio with a headshot on a wall. And the headshots were very diverse. both, skin color, gender, and, it's a very powerful exercise to uncover your personal biases. And in talking through the session, one of the participants, said, well, that woman looks, she looks like a lawyer to me, just the way she's put together and what she's wearing. And I kind of stepped back and said, kind of made me uncomfortable. We said, talking, the conversation about saying the wrong thing, I felt, maybe that, that's not something I would have said, but the way that the room kind of, embraced that comment in a non-judgmental way, really, emphasized that it was more of a safe place, a place where we could continue to learn. And so once that level of trust was established, we continued to move on and started exploring those uncomfortable conversations of how do we, what can we do to make real progress. And again, just another anecdote is that we were talking about progress, can we do? And there was somebody who said, well, I think the progress needs to be slow and we need to be very methodical. And somebody else in the room said, we've waited too long. Like we can't continue to wait. And so it's those kind of profound moments that, really, made me realize how important this conversation is, and that we needed to make real progress as an industry, to your point, that, we may be lagging behind. And so again, a very, very powerful process to today, as you mentioned, where CREED's a formal organization, there's a board of directors, and you're working on tangible steps to move the conversation forward. So that's, I think very powerful, and very much proud to have played a small part in the early stages of CREED.
I think you're playing a big part too. So that's where I get to kind of spotlight you. So thank you for that as well. So you sort of touched upon a few areas that have had a meaningful impact for you. So thank you for that. When it comes down to what Ryan mentioned earlier in the conversation, this thing called shame, fear, guilt, blame, being silent, by not letting those things affect you, what can you share, as a word of wisdom and knowledge to our audience and our participants on how they could sort of pause those feelings, those thoughts, and be curious to learn, to see what they can do with their quote unquote privilege, whether they're male, female, person of color, or white person, someone who's, belongs to the LGBTQ plus community. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, in some of the sessions, we'd sit around a big boardroom table, and it was interesting to, looking around the table and the diversity of people you were able to bring together. I'd find myself being part of the minority as a, straight white male, and obviously at the beginning, that feels a little bit uncomfortable, and again, not being able to really, relate to these difficult experiences people have had. It was uncomfortable. But, beyond that, and echoing on some of, Ryan's points about the fact that we all play a role in this. And I think that was very evident. And in those conversations with people around the table, it was evident that it needs to be, there needs to be a sense of camaraderie, that we're, all in this together, that everybody's pulling their weight to make progress. And so, I thought it was incredibly important to continue to participate and really not, you spoke about privilege, not feel a sense of shame about my privilege, but I talk about, okay, what am I going to do about the fact that, again, maybe the playing field hasn't been even, and I've had, an easier and more smoother path to where I am today than others have been. So, I have 2 young kids at home, and obviously, it's very important to me to think about, what is the world going to look like when they're growing up, and in today's age, where and the moment we're in, so to speak, there's a lot of talk about people being, judged, for their silence. And so I definitely want to make sure that, down the road that we are making progress and that we are making that positive change for today, for us, for everybody, and for future generations as well. So
yeah. No, that's really great. And I'm sure you and I could chat, hours on this, but being mindful of the time, I have just one last question. What is that one thing, just one thing you would suggest for others to do to get involved or to kickstart their learning when it comes to diversity and equity for our industry in itself?
It's hard to focus on one thing. I have a couple of things to suggest.
Sure.
But just in general, again, relating to the conversations that we've had, it can be a very overwhelming topic and an overwhelming problem that seems difficult or impossible to solve at times. But starting small, I think, has been my approach, and something that's worked for me, and it seems to be working for the Creed Council, and hoping that small actions can create a more of a snowball effect. So as Haban mentioned, I think it really starts with educating yourself, and today I think there's many more resources out there than we've ever had, starting with the work that you're doing with Matrix and the Creed Council. So those are relatively easy to come by. And I would say also just the profound impact that those uncomfortable conversations have had on me, and starting those conversations with your partner, with your family, colleagues, and really trying to understand what role everybody can play in moving this conversation forward. Because again, as I mentioned, I think we all have to realize collectively that this is a problem that we're all facing. It impacts certain groups more than others, which again is not particularly fair. But we're as an industry, in order to make progress, we have to make sure that we're not leaving people behind or making it difficult for people to progress. And so I think once there's more consciousness about that, and there's a more collective conversation such as this one, I think we're going to see hopefully some real further progress.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Alex, for sharing your insights and your perspectives. I'm sure our participants are quite happy that you are sharing and how you've got involved. So Ryan, would love to pass the mic back on to you. And if you are interested in learning more about Creed Council, please email Ryan or myself, or check us or check Creed Council on the web, and let's get involved. And thanks once again. Peace.
Thanks so much, Chandran and Alex, for that. Thank you to both of you, as well as Haban, for being here for this conversation today. I really appreciate you hearing about all of your perspectives. Similarly to Alex, I also have to share a story about my journey of learning that I'm happy to share with you, but I don't have time to do that today. But feel free to reach out to me anytime if you're curious to learn more. Andre liked my story, which is why he had to take part in this conversation, and be super happy to have a virtual chat with anyone that wants to and help shed some light on the importance of equity in business and our industry. So our purpose at Matrix is really to be that bridge for people, profits, and possibilities. And the topic of equity and diversity is not new, and it's not going away. I believe that we all have the power to influence and change within our own circles, and it is likely that we will make mistakes in the process, say the wrong thing. But it's important to pause, reflect, and take feedback rather than getting defensive or scared from having that conversation. This is a journey, and we can get there together. But sometimes we need to try and sometimes fail in order to succeed. It is through dialogue and openness and a commitment to a will to change that matters. Our conversation today might have made you feel uncomfortable, shocked, motivated, upset, or curious to learn more. So please do not ignore those feelings, but continue the dialogue with others, as Alex mentioned, your friends, family, and reach out to us, and remember that feelings are the first step in embracing the power of you. And as Chandra mentioned, if you'd like to get involved with commercial real estate leaders taking action for true change, connect with the CREED Council at equitymatters.ca or with us at Matrix 360. Thank you for listening and dedicating your time, and I'll turn it over to Lirat.
Thank you, Ryan. That was great. So thank you, Ryan, Haban, Alex, and Chandran for sharing your unique perspectives. We really appreciate your participation, and it gave us a lot to think about. I think it showed us the importance of speaking out about diversity and inclusivity, both in the workplace and in the city building process. But the challenges and risks still exist about speaking out and speaking our truths. It's not just about diversity tokenism. It's not about the optics. It's about making real actionable changes to the system, and we're all in this together. So thanks a lot, guys. I do want to say that this episode was generously sponsored by the Brookfield Center for Real Estate and Infrastructure, and the proceeds go to the Thompson T. Egbo Arts Foundation. Episode 4 is coming up on Tuesday, July 7th at 12 p.m. So I really hope you all join us then. The episode is called Building for Everyone, Why Affordable Housing is Good for All of Us. And we're going to speak to 4 housing champions to understand what drives them to advance affordable housing and how we can work together to overcome our housing challenges. We're going to explore how purpose, policies, new technologies, and innovative thinking are converging to make affordable housing possible in a global city, and why good housing policy makes our city a better place for all. I also want to make a little pitch for another interesting initiative that I think all of you will appreciate. I'm excited to share with everyone that Matrix 360, TREL, or the Toronto Real Estate Leaders, the SRPAA, and the Brookfield Center have partnered to create a new series called Real Stories, where we're going to share the stories and spotlight leaders who don't normally get the spotlight, but who reflect the demographics of our city and who openly discuss the challenges, failures, barriers to success in our industry. So please be on the lookout for your personal invite to that. And once again, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. Hope you all got some value out of it, and see you next time. Thank you.